Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully, I can make this worthwhile by showing you a tool that helps you make your site better. Better. What's better? Well, there's better business success, right? You sell more, convert more, get more exposure by better ranking over your competitors. And there's tools to test that. You can have better user experience, and you can test that by getting an actual human to sit in front of your site and give them a task, measure the effectiveness and efficiency of them fulfilling that task. And since they're a human, you might be able to see if there's any emotion that happens when they're trying to fulfill that task. You can't have an experience, a user experience, without emotion. Or you can get your site to be technically better. So, who determines what's technically better? Well, we can leave that up to Google. We leave a lot of things up to Google. Google's mission is to serve up relevant, quality pages to their visitors. They don't want to send their visitors to bad pages. So they have a set of metrics that they rank us with. And they're open about that now. In the past, Google wasn't always so open about what they put in their algorithm. They're very open about the core web vitals. They're so open, in fact, that they've built a tool that measures with their metrics right into their browser, Chrome. So, and that's what we're talking about tonight. Technically better HTML, efficient delivery of everything you're delivering that's going to render up a page for the visitor. So, you can't talk about Lighthouse in Evanston without showing the Evanston Lighthouse. So let's do a quick benchmark here just to see where we're at in the room. Also, this is sort of a takeaway list too of sort of a pretest. So what language is that? That's CSS. And what does it do? It puts a background image into any HTML element that you want it to that you apply it to. As we'll learn tonight, background image could be a bad thing for your performance because the background image is typically where it's in your CSS, so it's an extra step of discovery for that image that the browser needs to go down that path. What's a WebP? That's a next generation format. And we'll find out tonight that thing will save us 20 to 30% over the equivalent JPEG or PNG. What's that? What goes in there? Well, the picture element allows an image tag and as many sources as you want to give it as well. The problem with a WebP is this machine, if I open Safari on this machine and browse around the web, I won't see any WebPs because I haven't updated this thing past Big Sur. So how do I fall back? Well, I can't do a fallback with an image format in a background image. I can with a picture, right? I put a source. What the source basically does is say, hey, browser, if you're delivering this to a big screen, use this big image. If you're delivering it to a small one, here's the small image. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with the picture element or what this WP is, just take the regular image. I'll put a regular JPEG in there. So those are two things with images that we want to keep in mind as we think about performance. Another one is pretty obvious. What does it do? Well, it loads things lazily. It lowers the priority of whatever you put this attribute on. And that's any media. So it could be an image, could be an iframe. So when you think about prioritizing or deprioritizing things. Remember, if you prioritize everything, nothing gets priority, and vice versa. So you don't want to lazy load everything. You especially want to give your most important thing on the page priority. Anybody know what an LCP is? In a word, that's the most important thing on the page. The first thing that loads in the viewport, or the largest thing that loads in the viewport. It's our largest contentful paint. And if we deliver an efficient file format, if it's an image, and get it there really quick, we get really good scores in this tool we're going to look at. And it's an important metric because we're talking about the site's main message most of the time, even if it's a call to action, or even if it's something like, hey, keep reading, go below the scroll and see more. Whatever it is, that's a pretty important first message. So what's that? It's a lazy way to say accessibility. Accessibility is important for lots of different reasons. And even if you're selfish about it, it'll increase your scores, which increases your rank in Google. Accessibility are things you should be doing anyway, just keeping your HTML proper. So what's Crux? Well, that's Google's acronym for the Chrome User Experience Report. And what that is, it's the same metrics we're going to look at tonight, including the LCP, but it's real user data, what Google calls real user monitoring, or RUM. It's basically, you can look at those numbers that the Chrome User Experience Report gives you, and it will say something like, well, 50% of your users are annoyed at your slow site. Here's another acronym. Any guesses what that is, or anybody know? It's the time to first byte. So whatever happens before the time to first byte, before that first HTML document hits the user's device, the user clicks on the glass, the DNS, how fast the web host is, what version of PHP, how many plugins you got, whatever it takes to put that package together and deliver it to the user's device. We have a certain amount of control over that, but that can get complicated. So we're going to focus on, after that time to first byte, what happens after that. As soon as the HTML document hits that user's device, we can control all kinds of things to increase that user experience of the load, the interactivity, the time to interactivity, and also the visual stability of the page as it builds. Who am I? Who cares? Just so you know, just so you believe what I'm talking about up here. I've been a web builder since the 90s. I've built a lot of pages, designed a lot of pages, developed a lot of pages. I don't know which word to use anymore for any of that. The Ruby on Rails people told me I wasn't a developer because I didn't develop on Rails, and the React people 10 years later are telling me that now too. So I also work on a lot of sites that I didn't build, tinkering, tuning up. Maybe I'm a mechanic. So we'll go with that. And I also been teaching for a while too. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. Show you how to run this Lighthouse tool and explain the scores. We're going to concentrate on performance because that's the easiest thing to increase your scores and the easiest thing to increase your user's experience. We'll mention accessibility and SEO stuff and how Lighthouse points the issues out. Those should be easy to fix. Those are things that you should be doing in your HTML anyway. Proper HTML structure, etc. Most of us in here concentrate on WordPress, so we'll talk about the issues and solutions on WordPress. And I've got a slide on some other tools you can use to measure things. So what are we measuring? We're measuring the perceived experience, right? Um, the perceived UX during the page loading and the first interactivity. And how are we measuring that? We're looking at timelines and times it takes for the browser to get all the stuff and put it all together. The recipe of the HTML document, the ingredients and the methods that's going to bake that page for the user. And why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it maybe primarily for better scores that give us better Google ranking, but primarily we should be doing it to make better pages, to make our pages better for those first two reasons I gave you: the business success and user experience, better experiences for our users. Um, as designers and developers, we should be striving for better pages. This is what we want to see. Our scores all be 100. It's really hard. It's in reality, we have a thing called clients that are going to want designs, fonts, images, drone footage, social media plugins, contact forms, all the pop-ups, all kinds of stuff that are going to slow us down. And there's no way around um, uh, slowing things. There's one opportunity for us that are freelancers in this room to get perfect scores, and that's with our own freelance site, because there's no client telling us we need all that stuff. So, how important is a perfect score? I think it's more important to understand you need a better score than your competition. So, I'm going to open. I'm going to open it up in a minute, but I do have a slide on how to get there. I'm going to show you that in a second. But once you get there, once you get to the Lighthouse tool inside DevTools, this is what you're going to see as a panel. You're going to leave everything as a default. So you eliminate your variables. I'll go through those. And all you do is click on the Analyze Page Load, and it takes a few seconds depending on how complex your site is, and it comes up with your scores. And they're easy to read because it's either red, yellow, or green. And even your sales and marketing departments can understand that stuff. And you can see ComEd is dismal. I was I really wanted to click on the little chat icon on ComEd and say, hey, I'll bring up your performance scores by at least 30 points if you waive my winter electric bill. And I figured that they would come back and say, if you don't pay your bill by tomorrow, you're not going to be loading any pages anyway. So, um, so just one more slide before we dive into it. You need to run your site with HTTP within Chrome in order to use Lighthouse. So you need to serve it up. In other words, you can't just open the directory in Lighthouse. It'll tell you need HTTP. So what do? You can open it in VS Code. VS Code, I think, comes with Live Server now. Easy enough extension to get. And you click on that little thing that says Go Live, and you get a browser with your site in it. If you're such a person, you can use the command line to open up a server. Point your terminal at a directory, open up a server. Or if you're running WordPress, you can use local WP, which used to be called local by Flywheel. It's a free tool for setting up local WordPress installs. Or you can use MAMP, WAMP, XAMPP, whatever your flavor is. So I built a site to highlight some issues. It's basically just a mirror of the slides, and it's a good place to put all the links and resources and stuff. So they're there. This is just a list of issues. We'll talk about these when we get there. It's a big, long site. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. And we'll talk about these metrics and things that are inside there. So here's the site. So if I want to get to Lighthouse, what do I do? Well, I can go up to the view menu, go to developer, go to developer tools. If I'm on Windows, I can hit F12. There is a Mac keyboard shortcut. I don't remember what it is because I get there a different way. And if I can't remember it, me telling you won't make you remember it. So what I do is I right click or control click. I do that up here so you can see inspect. Down at the bottom of the menu, I click inspect. My element tab opens, right? And I can inspect the document. I can see what's going on all around, et cetera, et cetera. But what I want to do is go up to these tabs up here and find this little double arrow that says more tabs. I want to find Lighthouse in the tab, and then I'll get to this panel here. So, let me expand this just a little bit so you can see the whole thing here. So you're going to leave all the defaults as they are. You want to eliminate as many variables as possible, especially when you're doing the benchmarking. You have some more controls over throttling. This is going to emulate a Moto G4 mid-grade phone. Is it mid-grade? And you're going to get sort of a, I think they upgraded it to a slow 4G network because nobody really is on 3G anymore. You have a couple other options on this panel as well, including some settings that you don't need to go into, and your list of reports. If you're doing a benchmark and then working on a site, you'll have a list of each time you do this. So you leave on mobile because that's what Google's metrics are based on. And you're going to leave all the categories checked. I'm not, I don't do web apps, and most of the sites, you're just going to get a little error message that says there's nothing relevant to check. Same thing for the publisher ads. So I'm going to leave those off. Your choices for navigation, time span, and snapshot. Other ways to test, especially if you want to test over a time span, like the user lands on the landing page, clicks on a call to action, and does something. You can sort of test for that flow. So I'm going to analyze the page load, click on it. It's going to take a few seconds to run this audit, going through my page. Obviously throttling, pretending it's slower than it is, and giving you some stuff to read while you're looking. And there's my scores. So I've endeavored to make a bad site. So I've done some things wrong on purpose. When I first built this, I had a larger header picture, so I had my largest contentful paint was a little more evident. The LCP now is that Lighthouse SVG up there, so I needed to do a bunch of other stuff to get a worse score because it was pretty good when I first built this. So what is on this page before we look at the scores? It's this navigation menu. There's a big picture of the Evanston Lighthouse with the Photoshop fake sky going on there. A bunch of stupid scroll snap stuff happening, and some notes on things. There's a big picture I took from a window. The lighthouse is down there somewhere, and then just some extraneous stuff like a lighthouse slick slider. And then sort of a recreation of the slides that we'll go through talking about the metrics, and some code, some YouTube things you should watch, and resources down at the bottom. So that's what's going on the page. What's going on in my scores? So my performance, these yellow scores are 50 to 89. They mean you need improvement. Remember that from school? Green is good, red is bad. So this panel is going to give me all kinds of info about what's happening. So let's look at the performance stuff. It's going to be a calculation. And of course, you can see more and see the calculator, etc. to figure out how they're figuring these scores out. This largest contentful paint now, this score um, is going to vary depending on your CPU. I'm recording this right now, so this LCP is quite a bit worse than it's going to be if I'm not recording, because my recording software is using a bit of the CPU. So that's going to make a difference in how the browser is actually able to parse things. So the LCP there is a timeline of everything that happened before that Lighthouse logo showed up. The speed index is how fast sort of the user kind of gets a feeling that something is happening. Um, it's kind of based on a bunch of things, but you can see it's the same as this first contentful paint, which is really when the text shows up. Time to interactive is still good. You can see it's green. I got 5 seconds on that. I got 2.5 seconds to do the larger contentful paint, and the layout shift is if anything shifts around. I've fixed a few things. I tried the stupid scroll snap interface to see if the layout shift would kick in. All around this interface is help. So if I expand this view, it's going to explain what all those metrics mean and links to the documentation. Also, I mentioned before, this is now a report that's sort of saved in my browser session. If I close the browser, those will go away. If I want to save this report, the best thing to do is, this is the report here with the little kebab menu. If I click on that, I can see print summary, print expanded. I can save that as a PDF from my browser. The print summary just gives me all the scores. The print expanded gives me all the opportunities and issues and suggestions that you're going to see as I scroll down here. And I've had those that are 30 pages long. So they're good, especially the benchmark, so you can see what you've changed, and more importantly, that your client can see what you've changed. There's some other ways to save this info, especially if you're doing, integrated production, where you can integrate this tool in your command line, etc. And of course, toggle a dark theme. So those are my scores there. Other things that happen in this tool is I get a tree map. So if I click on tree map, I get sort of a graph. The bigger things are, scripts and styles that are taking up the time. I get this little menu down here of how much coverage or how much of that script is not used. So this jQuery, only half of it is being used, and I would imagine it's even less than that. So I can dig deep into some of these things, but I'm really kind of concerned here with these numbers and the opportunities that come down. Also, the view original trace, if I pull that up, I get a much more complex document or timeline here, where I can see, the first contentful, the largest contentful, how long that took, and I can see the film strip of, especially if I've got lots of things that are not showing up right away, etc. I've got that tool as well. Notice I've clicked on that and I've landed on the performance tab. I can always get to that performance tab if I want to, but I'll go back to the Lighthouse, and I'll scroll down to the opportunities. You can sort of filter them here. But the first opportunity is this properly sized images. Now, to make a bad page, I have loaded full-size JPEGs throughout this site. And it's telling me how much I can save if I save these as just a better size, right? For cell, if I use that picture element and the sources I talked about in the beginning, I can deliver properly sized images for the smaller devices. So it lists all of those for me. And then it says serve images in next gen formats. So it tells me how much I'll save if I convert these JPEGs to WebPs. And how hard is that to do? Well, if you're using WordPress, you can download the new Performance Lab plugin from WordPress themselves, and everything you upload will be, if you check the box, everything you upload will be saved as a WP, or you can even decide to save both, and decide how to serve those up. And then it says efficiently encode images too. So these JPEGs, I usually save these at 80% quality out of Photoshop. So I could probably squeeze them down quite a bit more. Anybody know the zero quality trick? So if you're delivering an image that's actually going to be twice the size that it's actually going to render at, you can take that quality slider and slide it all the way down to 0. And chances are you won't see any artifacts or any issues. There's some issues with skin tones, but it's just a weird trick. Enable text compression. I'm serving this up out of the VS Code server, so there may not be any zipping happening. Your actual host will probably not give you that issue. Avoid enormous network payloads. Well, if I look at this list, of course, it's those big giant JPEGs again. It ensure text remains visible during web font load. What was I? Ooh, that's from the carousel. I didn't see that before. Third-party resources can be lazy loaded with a facade. So if you can solve this issue, you're going to save quite a bit. Now, you can lazy load the YouTube iframe and also whatever other iframes you might be. Think of your Instagram feeds, Facebook feeds, all of that other. The YouTube embed player has the player script, analytics, all kinds of other JavaScript happening. So you can use a facade to save some load time, and I'll give you a resource for that. The passive listeners for scrolling performance, that's a jQuery issue. It's always sort of there. I think you can, however much that saves. That's an important one and an easy one, right? Go to all your images and make sure they have the width and height in there, and that'll increase your score. It may or may not cause your layout shifts because the browser doesn't know how big an image is. It doesn't know how to build a page correctly. But definitely putting those in there with your intrinsic sizes will speed things up. Explicit sizes, not extrinsic. A cache policy. So these are from YouTube. So not concerned with those because I'm going to do a facade over those anyway. Avoid chaining critical requests. So in other words, if one document needs another document, that's a chain. That's going to slow things down. Now I'm in the area where it's not such a big deal. Whatever these next ones are, request counts low. My LCP is actually pretty quick. It'll show me which it is choosing as the LCP. I'm avoiding large layout shifts, but there are some things happening, I guess. So it points those out. They're tiny little changes. This menu's got a lot of clamping and calculating going on, and these are links. So if the transition that you normally put on a link when to have a nice hover happens to transition a calculation or a dynamic font size changing when things are loading, that'll actually affect your layout shift and affect your score. Avoid non-composited animations. Yeah, I threw that in there just to see if it would find that, and that's a good one if you're an animation geek. You should be animating transforms. Unfortunately, the way I did that was a background image, so I can only animate the background position there. So that gives me a kind of a warning. It it may or may not affect the actual layout shift. And then I get down to the accessibility, and I've left some things out on purpose here. So no alt attributes. If I click on that, it'll go right to my elements and show me which thing is causing the problem. You can see that image there has no alt. I'll go back to the Lighthouse tab here, and I can click on the accessibility or the best practices where wherever I was there to hop down there. I've also not set up my HTML correctly. My heading elements are not in the correct order. I've got an H1 and then H3. Oh man, what am I doing? So anyway, the why is that a big deal? Well, for accessibility, for the tab interfaces, for people who can't use a mouse that are tabbing around this interface and skipping around badly structured HTML, may get lost, might even get trapped in certain ways, depending on how bad your HTML is. So lots of other things just that are basic HTML errors that could trigger in this accessibility issue. There's a whole list of manual things to check. So things that Lighthouse can't look for. So obviously, if you're concerned about accessibility, you want to go through these manually. And then best practices. It will tell me if so. If I have an older version of jQuery, it'll tell me there's vulnerabilities in the. I have a vulnerability to say vulnerability for that version, and my score will go down. I'm logging some issues. If you log errors in the console, it'll also give you that warning. It could be a security issue if you're logging errors. And then things like cross. If you're doing a lot of third party stuff, that issue is going to matter. And then you get to the SEO. What do I have that's wrong here? Well, I don't have a meta description. I don't have alt attributes on a lot of my images, so it's going to yell at me. And then there's going to be past audits in any of these, and these past audits, they don't really tell me do I have something proper in that title? Do I have the proper descriptive text? Do I have the other proper things? I do have legible font sizes, so that and my contrast errors will come up here if my font doesn't have enough readability. This one, I don't know why the legible font size is under SEO. It should be under accessibility, right? But maybe that's just a doc you get. And then targets are appropriately sized. Again, kind of an accessibility thing. So if your little tiny social media icons are right next to each other and you click on the wrong one because you get click collision, there's your issue for that. So you can see there's lots and lots of details here for anything that you could be doing wrong that this tool will point out for you. Down at the bottom, it kind of gives you, the details of how it did things. So when you do another one, you after you've changed some things, you kind of have those benchmarks and you've eliminated those variables. All right, so let me hop back. And we'll talk about some of these metrics. So, I mentioned the LCP and how important that is to your overall performance score. The layout shift you're going to have issues with if you have third-party ads loading, that sort of stuff. Your time to interactive and your first input delay are user-based interactivity measurements. And we don't have a user here. We have a machine testing this stuff. So they're actually going to deprecate that time to interactive and use the total blocking time as a approximation of how long it takes before the user can start to scroll or click on navigation elements, etc. All right, so what are my other uh, details about these metrics here? So largest contentful paint. Contentful is a weird word, but it the browser and Google needs to figure out what is that element that it's going to consider as the largest, most important thing. And it uses some heuristics and it uses some guidelines, like if the giant background image that loads that's in the background of your page of your body, is that content or is it decoration? So things like that may not be your LCP. So you're going to use this tool to figure out what your LCP is, and you're going to figure out how to get it to the user's device in 2.5 seconds. Because if you consider that's your site's main message, and you want to get it there as quick as possible. Even if it's something like a call to action or it's something that says keep reading at the top of the page. So anything that loads before that LCP loads, scripts, fonts, style sheets, will slow that number down. Remember, don't lazy load your LCP image. Your LCP is not always an image, depending on what your content is, but most of the time it is. And WordPress now lazy loads everything, including whatever is the first thing, the largest thing in the viewport. So I'll show you a couple strategies for that, or a slide that has that strategy on it. If you just take the baking a cake metaphor, how do you bake a cake? Well, you get a recipe, you get everything you need lined up, all the ingredients, all the methods that you need. If you forgot to read the ingredients for the frosting, and you got to go back to the store to get cream of tartar, or to figure out what that is, why you need it, that's going to slow you down from baking the cake, right? Even though the frosting is the last thing you do after you bake the cake. You can do it while the cake is baking. Okay, enough of the food metaphor. Take a look at how this works. So the time to first bite, whatever hits the user's device first, is typically the HTML document with all of those instructions, all of the links and styles and font links and all of that stuff. So however long that takes is part of the timeline. Then whatever needs to load determined by that HTML document, your CSS, your fonts that are Google fonts, scripts, anything else that's going to load, anything you're trying to preload, will come up at that point. And then if you've prioritized that LCP, it should be the first thing that starts loading as a resource, and then everything else is coming along, maybe asynchronously. So that's the way that works, and then there's maybe some render delay at the end there, that encoding and things like that. There's even a new attribute you can put in your images that synchronously decodes your images. Usually that's a lot less of an impact than the actual size of your image. Just a mention of the CLS, your layout shift is going to be determined by what is, repainting, reloading, usually third-party things. You have to really try with your regular HTML to do this. It's a calculation based on how much moves and how much it impacts other stuff. The time to interactive, like I said, is being deprecated, but it's important to look out for that total blocking time that you'll see, because even though the page might look rendered, if the user can't scroll or click on a thing within 5 seconds, they're going to be annoyed. you may render everything and you're still loading JavaScript that you need to do this or that. It's going to slow things down. So some notes on images. So images are the easiest thing to deal with to bring your scores down or up, as it might be. Your timeline, your time down, but your score is up. Use those modern formats. That WP is going to save you a huge chunk. Um, Try to avoid that CSS background image. It's a second fetch, basically, if you will, where the browser's got to get the HTML, then get the CSS, and then get any background images that are in that CSS. So it's kind of a late discovery. So if you're using a background image as your largest contentful paint, that's going to have a definite effect. Lazy load anything that's not um, in your viewport, and of course, what that does is going to prioritize that one thing you want to show up first. You can even preload that image, that LCP image, and again, don't lazy load that. Use the WebP. There are lots of ways to do this. So if you're WordPress, use that Performance Lab. There are lots of other plugins that will convert your uploads that way. There's browser-based tools for doing conversions. I use the command line to convert my JPEGs because I can do it in bulk. It's only a matter of time before Adobe says, okay, there is a plugin for Photoshop that's free you can use. But eventually I think Photoshop will say, I know Google invented this format, even though it's open source. I guess we'll start supporting it. It has you can animate it. It's got higher bit depths than a GIF. It's easier to pronounce, so you don't have the confusion with WebP with that you do with GIF or GIFs. You have transparency and widespread support. I mentioned it doesn't work in Safari pre-Big Sur. It also doesn't work, of course, in the Microsoft browser that they spell with an I before an E. You can preload that largest contentful paint. Also, the other attribute that you may not know about is the fetch priority high. So you can put that in your regular image tag as well. And but this is going to go in the head of your document, and you're going to preload that image, give it a high priority so it's ready to render when the page is ready to render. Use the picture element with sources because you can deliver the proper size image and the proper format, so you can fall back to JPEGs for those Safari people that are still carrying around a old machine. I wonder who those people are. There's a lot of old Macs out there. Yeah, and use the type, and that will help the browser figure out what it needs as a fallback. What's missing here? And two things that are important. You just saw them in the report there. The alt. There's three things, yeah, and the width and height. So make sure you get those in there. You can lazy load your iframes. This will save you a little bit, but if you're dealing with YouTube embeds, there's another tool you can use. It's fairly easy to implement. It's a small script. It goes and gets the poster image of your YouTube embed. All you have to do is the same thing. You get your YouTube ID, and the script does the rest. It puts a poster image up, and when the user clicks on a poster image like they're clicking on a video, everything loads. You can read these charts even if you don't know how to read the performance tab. You can see there's a lot more going on the left side than on the right side. There's a lot more. You see at the bottom there, that big stalactite. Those are all the big list of scripts, analytics, and player scripts, et cetera, et cetera. So a couple, just a mention of accessibility and SEO in a couple slides here. These are things you should be doing in your HTML anyway. Your proper structure, make sure your forms have the proper labels. And you might run into things like everybody's got that hamburger menu that has the X. It turns into an X when you click on it. That's a checkbox input, right? So if you don't have a label on that, your accessibility score will go down because you've got to label everything that is a form input for accessibility. Choose your WP form plugins dependent on accessibility. You may be using the same form plugin for ages and realizing it doesn't have the proper area labels, or it doesn't have the right tab thing, or it too easily lets you use the same form twice on a page that has the same ID, which can get tab users in trouble because they tab, you have a newsletter sign up form on the top and on the bottom, and it's the same ID, it's the same form from WP Forms that you've just plugged into the page. And a tab user could theoretically tab to the wrong submit button and get confused. There's lots of other things to manually test for there. And SEO, same thing. Lots of stuff you should be doing anyway in your HTML should be basic stuff: meta tags, titles, link descriptions. Your robot.txt syntax should be correct. WP Forms actually rewrites your robots.txt and only puts one line in there and gets the syntax wrong. So you'll see a SEO issue if you don't correct that one line. Easy enough to fix, but it's there. And of course, all of your attributes should be present throughout. This tool doesn't yell at you for things that are really going to affect your SEO, like if your title or your links or your alts are useful or help search engines in any way. But one thing is that lazy loading of all of your images. You can use one of the caching things to disable the lazy loading. What you can do is make sure the default lazy loading is off and use one of those tools to selectively lazy load what you need to. And usually it's everything that's not in the viewport. The Performance Lab has a couple of other little things in it as well, like it adds the fetch priority to the first thing on the page. This is just started up a blank 2023 theme. Used one of the basic block patterns that's a hero element, put an image in it, uploaded it with the web performance or the Performance Lab, so it's a WP, and you can see it's the first thing on the page and it's lazy loading. All right, so there's lots of other details we can talk about here. There's other tools that really aren't applicable to this talk. They're field tools that use the same metrics, but they'll use actual data. So, we'll tell you 59% of your users have a good experience, while the rest of them don't. And you can drill down in those in those reports. New in Chrome Canary, I mentioned, Chrome Canary is a newer build, so it's got new stuff in it. It's got a performance insight panel, which includes a lot of the stuff that the Lighthouse insights do, but it gives you, this nice little train map, and some other info there too that you can drill down when you really need to. And for those that don't want to use any Google tools, there is a tool for Edge that's built into VS Code. That's an extension for VS Code. All right, lots of details there. Like I mentioned, the site has resources, couple YouTube things to watch, including this one here, if I get it edited. Lots of details, but that's a good thing because this tool is going to tell you everything you need to do and make your site better.